So welcome back to the Neuro Symbolic Channel. I'm Shakarian, and today we're going to be talking about some work that my group has been doing on movement trajectory generation. And what's interesting about this is we actually use annotated logic, which we have talked about in some previous videos on the lecture, but if you missed those, don't worry, we'll discuss it really briefly. And we use it in kind of an interesting way. We use it for what you would probably call generative AI, I suppose, but it's generative AI purely by symbolic means. So there's actually no neural networks involved in this particular work. We actually had plans when we started this to continue on and add in a neural component, but the program ended, and so we didn't pursue that. So anyway, this work is based on two papers. Actually, primarily it's the one on the left as you look, the ICLP paper, where my PhD student, Bavikadi, she was the primary author on this one. It was funded by our IARPA work under the Haystack program, and we had colleagues from Leidos, so you'll see Graham Mueller, who's a research scientist there, as well as Chad Parvis from Epoch Geo, which is this like super cool small business out of the DC area. And then the other paper will more for background is our AAAI make paper from 2023 on PyReason, which is our open world temporal logic platform based on annotated logic. And so just to recap on PyReason, there's a couple things that it was designed to have, designed to use the annotations to connect with things like deep learning, allow for open world modeling, which we'll talk about in a moment, as well as just be generally an optimized way of doing logic programming. The other thing that PyReason provides is a temporal logic, so you could reason over time, and we saw in some of our other work on this channel using PyReason to act as a semantic proxy. It really leveraged the temporal aspect of this. So what is annotated logic? Well, it was introduced by Michael Kiefer and V.S. Subramanian in the 90s, and the main idea is you could have basically a monotonic logic where instead of truth values or even scalars like in fuzzy logic, you could generalize it further and have the truth values be associated with elements of a lattice structure. And even if you generalize logic in this way, which you can capture a lot of things, you capture intervals of probability, for example. You could capture tri-valued logic. You could capture everything that fuzzy logic does, as well as just normal classical logic. So there's like a wide class of logics that could be characterized in this one framework. And what's neat about it is all the theoretical results, you get all these things kind of for free. And so we developed a variant of annotated logic in a 2022 paper, me and Jerry Simari, who you also see on the channel a bunch, where we made a small change to annotated logic where we used a lower lattice structure, which you see depicted here on the slide. So we have a lower lattice. The original framework does it with an upper lattice. We show that under reasonable assumptions, a lot of the key theoretical findings still hold. And this is useful because what we wanted to show is that you could have annotations where you always start out with uncertain, and as you move up the lattice, you can converge onto a closed interval. And so a very simple one is just 3 intervals as shown here, but of course you could have more. And we used in our work with, on the movement trajectories, we actually leverage this. And the way we do is to describe how abnormal a trajectory is by moving up in the logic. And so PyReason's our implementation of this. It takes a graph. Basically, you're modeling a graph that changes over time based on some rules. And we have all these capabilities that, machine optimizations and so on. and it produces kind of this snapshot of the graph over time. But you can also take these aggregates, and so these aggregates here that I have the laser pointer on, we use those aggregates. We have a function that's an aggregate over the annotations on the logic as a way to measure anomalies. And we talk about why you'd want to do this, but there's really two reasons for doing this. Is one, we were able to have a very fast and efficient implementation where we could scale very easily, and we got pretty much like linear time in running this. And two, it tells you why something is anomalous. So you get this explainable result, which is great. And so, yeah, you can go download PyReason if you want, but let's now talk about the problem we're trying to solve. So the problem that IARPA gave us was to generate realistic looking movement trajectories of an agent through a city where you have all these GPS traces, and we see an actual one from historical data on the left, and you see an example of a generated one on the right. It has to be able to mimic the behavior to an extent where an anomaly detector can't find it. And it also has to meet certain requirements to visit certain locations. So the strategy that we use for this is based on abductive inference. So we have a case which for part of the program was movement instructions, and then we were starting to move toward waypoints. So you have, but that's what you actually produce. Your input is the model. So we start with the model, which are these learned rules about what an anomaly looks like. And then the result, what we want the agent to do is go to these certain locations and stay at certain locations for a certain time. And we're trying to abduce the actual movement that would produce these outcomes. And so we're doing this, in the annotated logic using an optimization technique called A-star. And so why rules? Well, one thing is you get this modularity, and this is what really gives us the efficiency. And then we had some plans to use rules that could be instantiated through a machine learning model that we didn't do, but we may still explore that in some other projects. And this also gives you explainability. So what the workflow look like is, first you have the training data and a knowledge graph that we had processed. Mostly the Leidos team was doing this, and based on all that data that was curated about prior agent movement trajectories, we use bottom-up rule learning to learn rules like what you see on the screen. And then these rules are used in two ways. One is a subset of the rules are used for our heuristic function to guide A-star, and then the full set of rules is used to actually compute the abnormality as your optimization criteria. And this gives us these realistic movement trajectories. And PyReason is kind of the logic engine supporting this. So here's some example rules, and you have things like if agent A goes to an educational premises and visits a utility area like a barn or a shed, then this is very abnormal, and we say it's abnormal with an interval between 0.9 and 1, so it's like extremely abnormal. And then so and we have another one that says it is anomalous. An agent who works in a highly hazardous industrial location will go to highly populated locations like theaters within the same time period. So these were actually extracted from data based on the movement trajectories. I'm not trying to say that these are hard and fast rules of human movement in general, but we had a data-driven approach that produced these. So how do you go from those rules to generating something? Well, you have a start and an end location that the agent needs to go to and required stays, and you can actually just enumerate out all paths and then just check which ones are more normal than others. But this, of course, is intractable. This is going to be something like depth first search, and it's going to be exponential time to complete. So here's the idea. If you have a set of rules pi, and they can find all the anomalies that you care about, and you have a set of rules pi prime, we prove that, which is a subset of pi, we prove that the anomalies that you find using pi prime will be a subset of the anomalies you find using pi. And so what you have because of this, we actually proved a little bit more general case dealing with the annotated logic. So we have, this statement here where we say, based on an ordering over interpretations and a subset relationship over logic programs, if you have a lower interpretation with a subset logic program, that annotation is going to be below the annotation assigned by that same logical element at that time for a superset with a higher interpretation. And so I'm not going to go through the formal proof right now, but it's kind of neat that that works, and this can maybe be used for other types of optimization problems based on logic programming as well. So anyway, operationalizing the theory, essentially we're using it to guide the A-star search algorithm. And the reason why you'd want to take a subset is the rules, if you remember the rules from the earlier slide, they're kind of dependent on the structure of the graph. And so if you have rules that are dependent on just one hop, an agent moving from point A to point B, you can represent that in a graph by itself, and you can compute that abnormality score very easily because you're only considering the one hop. If you consider multiple hops, then that's you got kind of this non-monotonicity amongst the number of anomalies produced when you have that. But since you always are guaranteed a subset of the anomalies by taking a subset of the logic program, we can use this easier logic program to guide the search process. So the idea here is that the heuristic function that's easier to compute and can guide the search process, we use that if something is really bad, has a lot of anomalies, using the pi prime, the subset, we can just eliminate that from further consideration. And so what we have here is we show on the left, this validates the heuristic, and we see that the actual values are below that dashed line, which means that the number of anomalies is fewer when you use the subset logic program. So it's just empirical validation of theory, that just makes sense. Then what we did is we compared a depth first search versus A star. Depth first search got very bad very quickly, heading toward exponential, where A star using this heuristic was almost constant in terms of runtime. And note that using A star in this way is still an exact approach. We're just using the heuristic to prune bad search paths, and they're provably bad search paths because of the theoretical results. So we go from exponential time to, like linear or constant time, something like that. But what's interesting about this is we can actually speed it up even more. We can even improve our performance by calculating the heuristic function on the fly, and this is particularly handy when the graph that you're reasoning about is very dense, and these are the results we see here. So we don't calculate, we compare this with the pre-computation of the heuristic function over the entire logic program versus just calculating it as we need, and we can get, in the larger graphs you get like a 40 or 50x speed up doing this. So this really helps with the scalability of it as a practical matter. This is still provably correct. It's not necessarily provably faster, and we had some cases where it wasn't, because you have this kind of overhead in each step of computing the heuristic function as you go. And if you are in a very small graph, that could become expensive, and maybe even more expensive than without this extra technique. But with the large graphs, like here San Francisco and LA maps that we were using, were very large, so this gave us a speed up there. Okay, so how'd this go compared to anomaly detectors? So the Leidos team also made anomaly detectors, and what we did is we calibrated it by looking at the anomaly scores that they gave to the test data. Now the test data is all normal, okay? So, and then we looked at the score it afforded to our generated trajectories compared to the average over the training data. And if I said test data a minute ago, I meant training, because we looked at the anomaly score on the training data, which is all normal. And so we only had about 4 times where this was above 1, because anything below 1, it means it's, the score is lower than the average of what it is on historical. So there'd be no reason to look at it. And even the ones above 1, nothing was more than 1.5 times. And you would think if something was anomalous compared to the history, it would be like 5 or 10 times more anomalous. And so chances are, at least with that approach, most of this would go under the radar. Now, we used this in a government test where we went against other companies that were creating anomaly detectors specially designed for this task. And they had a goal of having what was called a 40% probability of detection. They were trying to find our movement trajectories or parts of them at least 40% of the time. So how did that go? Well, on the whole, most of the time we were found below this 40% threshold by all these other teams, and there were many of them. And so this is looking at it by area on how this did in this test that we participated in, but we were not the ones to measure. And again, we were against some teams that were purposefully designing anomaly detectors to defeat us. So this was kind of a nice result to have. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. This is, we think, kind of a neat idea of taking a logic program that you learn from data and using it in, as a way to optimize, some kind of, I guess, what you would call generative AI method, doing some sort of optimization, but symbolic, so you understand every, why it took every step that it did. This research was funded, that I showed you today, was funded primarily by IARPA and was done in concert with Leidos, who was our prime, and we're following up on some of the ideas shown here in research funded by some of our other sponsors, in particular ONR. Anyway, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the video, and stay tuned for more content.